Great. Welcome, everyone. Welcome to this month's webinar from Banknotes, minted by #paid. My name is Ian Leslie. I'm editor-in-chief of Banknotes, and today I am joined by Rachel Swanson. Rachel is founder of Method and Mode. Method and Mode helps brands connect the dots, connect the dots between business goals and consumer needs. They leverage customized approach, marrying customer insights, market research, intelligent analytics to drive business forward. So wanted to talk to Rachel today, just as, we're in a crazy time, a crazy economy, D2C growth, e-commerce growth, up and down, retail up and down, and market research is more important than ever. So wanted to talk to Rachel a little bit how she does what she does and why it's important to businesses big and small. So welcome, Rachel.
Thanks, Ian. Glad to be here.
Awesome. So yeah, tell us a little bit about Method and Mode and just how market research works. I think a lot of executives, both for companies large and small, really don't understand market research.
Yeah. So, the way that I would really just distill down my approach to what market research is it's just getting a deeper understanding of the people that matter to your business. So that can be consumers, that can be your customers or clients, that could be internal audiences even. Some folks do internal research and market research before they roll out organizational initiatives. So it's understanding the people who matter to your business, what their needs are, and kind of dovetailing them into marketplace trends and economic factors, or what we sometimes call the realities of today, to really come up with a narrative and a direction that informs your strategy. So in a nutshell, like that's how I see it. It's just understanding people. And what we do at Method and Mode is work with companies, across different sizes and industries to really focus on insights that are rigorous in nature, in terms of how we go about developing studies and projects to really get the information we need, but with a business-centric focus. So always having some business decision-making hypotheses at the center that guide our approach to going out into field to get proprietary intelligence.
Awesome. Interesting. So are you finding that, I think market research is almost like a legacy tactic to an extent. It's like something that it's like a Mad Men-esque, right? Of like having to understand going to these groups and these audiences and understand what they do. And then we've kind of come fast forward to like the Wild Wild West of where like people just throw brands out there and throw products out there. And it's just like, let's see if it sticks. So are you finding that, who's using market research now? Is there a cross section of like smaller D2C brands all the way up to obviously, your enterprise level? And is it something that's trending, not trending? Like what are you seeing with market research?
Yeah. So there's definitely ebbs and flows. My background is varied, but heavily media, heavily digital, fair amount of fashion, beauty expertise, some CPG sprinkled in.
Mm-hmm.
And just what I've found is, it's really company specific, and starts from the top, how much a culture of insights is really integrated into an organization. However, there are certain industries that tend to do more research than not. CPG is a good example. There is an engine behind any product you see on the shelf, and oftentimes DTC brands, and there's the muddy waters now of a lot of DTC and kind of white label brands and
Mm-hmm.
acquisitions, but brands that you see on the shelf at a mass market store have likely had a fair amount of product research, whether it's on the packaging, the formulation, the positioning, the advertising. I mean, there's so many different facets of where you can study your intended customer. So CPG is a pretty evergreen area. Travel right now is kind of capitalizing on post-COVID
Mm-hmm.
trends in terms of understanding where people are at nowadays. Obviously, digital products, similar to any kind of CPG, making sure the utility and usability of digital products has been, something that continues to grow, in my world. And then on the flip side, you have industries or sectors that tend to do less, or more heady thought leadership research in kind of luxury goods, apparel, tend to do less traditional market research, in my experience.
Hmm.
But the bigger trend that I've been seeing, aside from company size or industry, is more reliance actually on qualitative. And so it's interesting to hear you say, market research is a legacy tool, and it really is in many ways. And people have, in their mind, what market research is, whether that's like a call center annoying you at dinner with a survey, whether that's, the picture of Mad Men style kind of focus group room, which still exists, and they're much nicer and more modern nowadays. But people, I think, have really been swinging towards qualitative, especially over the past couple of years, because the analytics doesn't give you the why and doesn't connect you with the person. And you can know so much about a journey, in your digital space and throughout your touch points, omnichannel. But until you're face to face with someone, you don't have that. You just don't have that humanity and that gut understanding, which is so critical for executives and leaders to have. So I've seen a lot more qual, Zoom one-on-ones, focus
Hmm.
groups, and back to in person now, especially the past 12 months or so. But that's a trend that I've been seeing is supplementing analytics with more qualitative.
I think that's super interesting. I mean, being coming from the D2C space for 5 years and then going into the software as a service space, um, I've seen on the software side a lot of that qualitative coming through as like gong calls, right? Like sales reps or customer service reps are recording their calls, obviously beknownst to the customer, and those are automatically getting pinged in Slack and tagged for positive and negative sentiment, or if this platform was brought up or this initiative or tool within the platform was brought up. And so I think that's really interesting, is that like it's almost market research on the fly, right? It's not as necessarily as canonized a process as it used to be.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think that's the thing, is I think there's kind of this idea that market research has to fit in a certain box and has to be done a certain way. But I think we all have points in our day and points in our role and responsibilities where we can use feedback we're getting and kind of put another, a 2 minutes more of thought against it to figure out how it can be more systematized. So I think, to your point, like sentiment analysis, sitting in on sales calls, even things like I recommend to clients sometimes, sure, everyone's like, oh, go on Facebook, depending on the maturity of a client, right, and how social they are, you know, go on Facebook or go on Instagram to see what kind of discussion there is. But even things like Discord and Reddit, which are not necessarily thought of as more, as kind of the go-tos in everyone's mind of social and community. But, there are vibrant communities, and there's
Hmm.
conversation happening about anything and everything. Twitch, I've been seeing more folks turn to. So while it
Sure.
might not be covered in traditional social listening, and I'm sure there are some shops that do, it's using whatever you can get a hold of in a systematic way, to me, is a great way to have a DIY approach to market research.
Yeah, super interesting. I mean, it's a benefit of growing a community is to get that real time research. One thing I want to circle back to, you brought up, is COVID and seeing some verticals utilize market research a little more post COVID. How much are you seeing now of brands or verticals that hadn't maybe used market research in the past, or maybe thought one way of how their product was being utilized, and then realizing post COVID things have totally changed, like, and they're having to go back to their audience and understand where they fit in.
Yeah. I've seen, like, frankly, these past 2 years for me have been some of the busiest ever.
Hmm.
So, everyone wants to know what shifts are happening. And in some cases, there are real shifts. In other cases, they're more benign or behind the scenes, right? Like, um, especially in the earlier stages of the pandemic when you weren't seeing as many people who you were seeing knew what was going on and where you were spending and what you were interested in. People you weren't seeing maybe didn't know. So there's kind of like, I think how that presented in trend data was that there was a shift in priorities and a shift in spending. But I think really it was more of just a transfer and a level of visibility more than actual spending. And now we're seeing with the current economic situation, we have true shifts in spending.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
I kind of think, there was a lot going on during to find out how things would change. I think things didn't change as drastically from a consumer perspective as we thought. And I think the bigger outcome, which I'm sure you and a lot of your partners have seen, is that things that were introduced during these past couple of years are now here to stay, like ordering online for in-store pickup and
Sure.
things like that, where once the technology was built, doesn't matter if there's a pandemic or not, it's going to be more and appealing to others. I'm not sure if that answers your question.
Yeah, no, totally. Yeah, definitely. I mean, just the fact alone that you're saying you've been busier than ever the past few years understands that there's a lot of brands and a lot of verticals that are having to reassess themselves, reassess,
Yeah,
um,
especially this past 6 months, it feels like, especially kind of in our, knowledge worker marketing, urban focused environment.
mhm,
It feels like we're much more in a back to normal, where definitely based on geography is a big driver of how
mhm,
the few years have felt, which you always have to remember as a researcher, not everyone is where you are.
sure.
Um, but there's definitely been a more kind of appreciation for that we have kind of normalized in this stage of whatever this stage is. And now the bigger driving force that I'm seeing clients interested in is economic outlook and financial picture, more so than, health, pandemic, security, et cetera.
Yeah, super interesting. Yeah, I mean, it's everything is constantly changing. I mean, and this is tangential, but I mean, recently talked to a CPG brand that is, I mean, very much marketing into like we're not a healthy product. And so, like, I think everything from the economic changes to societal kind of, we're tired of glossy, everything I need to be eating is healthy kind of narrative, and moving in that direction. Just everything is constantly changing. So definitely to have that ongoing research is critical to any brand's toolkit.
Yeah, and sometimes, I think, there's been a lot of focus on all the various attributes and levers you can pull as a marketer of how to
Hmm.
position a product. But ultimately, I think a lot of folks are just in the point now where they want a good quality product that makes them feel good and that their money was well spent. And I
Yeah.
think a little bit of getting back to fundamentals,
Hmm.
and less worried on how, the kind of myriad ways you can position something. And don't get me wrong, I love doing positioning research, but
Yeah.
I think like the fundamentals, I think most brands can really benefit from kind of getting a little check-in, even on a smaller scale, with some
Mm.
real some advocates, some people who've already interacted with your brand, and just getting a check-in to say, like, are we relevant? Are we delivering
Yeah.
something useful, that's working, that's fits in your life? That can be an oversight, which is always, a valid thing to go out and find.
Yeah. I just a couple of years ago, I was saying that if your product and your brand didn't come with a side of changing the world, then everyone wanted to make you feel bad. Now we seem to be like indexing back in the direction of like, just give me a good product. Like,
Yeah,
I don't need all the rest of the narrative. But let's talk about just the process. I mean, I was a CMO for 5 years. Before that, I was in higher ed. Now working on the SaaS side. Um, and if you asked me to take on a market research project today, I would have no idea other than to call Rachel and Method and Mode. So let's talk about the process. Like, how does it change based on whether you're a small D2C brand versus your mid-tiered enterprise level brand? Like, just walk me through a little bit of that.
Sure. So, essentially where you want to start is always with your objectives, and the goals and what you're hoping to find out or what your gaps are, right? A lot of times, kind of one of my three questions when I kick off with a prospective client or a new client is, what do you want to be able to say? Give me your wish list. Because if we have a hypothesis or an end result in mind, we either need to validate it so that you can proceed with executing against that strategy, or we need to find, a way that we need to know if it's going to be disproved and why it's being disproved so we can pivot, right? So starting with the objectives, like who you want to speak to, what you want to say, what you want to find, and then who you want to speak to. Really, that's the biggest piece that I like to focus on is kind of the study design and making sure that you're thinking about who will give you the answers you need, and how you're going to reach them. Where are those people, right? Mm-hmm. And once you know what you're trying to do, like the answers you're trying to get, who you think can give you those answers, then we move into, well, how are we going to do this? Is this going to be truly exploratory? Do we just need these people in a space and ask them some stuff and find out what they say? Or do we have some solid hypotheses that we are vetting? And how are we going to do that? Is it more important to have one-on-one or small group conversation where we can dive in and really get that emotional response and kind of be a fly on the wall with them in a qualitative, ethnography or focus group or one-on-one? Or is this something where scale matters and we actually need to get percentages and, understand from a market size perspective if this is more in the realm of predictability or, a broader trend that we can, infer about a market? And what kind of goes part and parcel with the methodology is actually who cares about the answers. And to me, this is again why I say we at Methodemo do business-centric customer and consumer insights, because it all comes back to who actually needs this information. And is this going to the C-suite? Is this going to your development team? Is this going to someone in your organization who just needs to see a stat? Because if that's the case, let's figure that out now. So when we come back, we are packaging the results for the person who cares about them in the right way. So that's kind of part of my process is which can again get overlooked. No one needs a 50-page deck with bar charts anymore. Like those days are long gone. I challenge the marketer to find someone who's going to read a report on the state of the state that's just chart after chart after chart. It doesn't happen. It's not useful. And so what you want to do is really figure out how you're going to, have the end result in mind and who cares about the end result and tailor that project to them. I've just found it makes things go a lot more smoothly. And so those are kind of the key steps. It's the objective setting and alignment, the audience or the sample design, the methodology preference, and then really the packaging. Those are the four components I really focus on with clients at the onset of a project to make sure, then everything falls into place. You just got to execute and, do the analysis.
So where do you think the biggest hiccup is in those four steps? I mean, I know for me in the times that I've gone through the process, it's probably finding the audience and finding the segment and finding and making sure that it's a good cross section of people who are going to give honest answers on either side and not just necessarily my super consumers or my super users who I know are going to just give glowing responses. Is that tend to be one of the hardest parts is finding the audience?
The audience is definitely a challenge. I think something that helps, that can help kind of a framework that can help with that is really thinking back to the objectives, what your end goal is, right? So if you're doing product development, whether it's digital, SaaS product, whether it's, website, whether it's content on your social feed, whether it's a tangible consumer good, right? If you're talking about product and talking about enhancing your product, you want to talk to people who've experienced your product. It wouldn't be the right recommendation to say, let's go to a national sample of household decision makers, because you don't know how you're going to find someone who's going to be able to weigh in on your product, right? And so kind of like really honing in on that focus of like who can give you product feedback the most, it would be people who've experienced. And then, coming out from there, right? So then if you want more perspective, market sizing, et cetera, like building out your sample from there. On the flip side, if you're doing something that's more about brand positioning, creative testing, or just kind of, thought leadership in a space, category intelligence, you would want to start broad and then identify within that broad sample where you find some interesting themes, right? So if you're kind of considering some positioning or some product market fit, and you're not sure how relevant it is to a particular audience, you would want to include a broad audience to then see, well, who's rating this on high appeal, who has strong positive sentiment, and then you would be able to kind of look at that data and say, this is who is really into it, this is who we want to target, and then build out your targeting and your kind of mental model around positioning that way. So again, it's back to it all kind of interplays, like the what and the who to drive the how. And ideally you would really kind of just define those as best you can with the teams that it makes sense to define them to set up a design that'll yield success.
Yeah, and I love that you talked about almost, starting with the ending first is just like what is the actionable takeaway that you desire as a brand? Because I'm sure there's nothing you hate more than doing all this work and just seeing it sit on the shelf because it's not, whatever the takeaway they needed, or it's just gonna, okay, this doesn't do them. They're just not using with the output. So just working with the brand to figure out, okay, like what do you need to take away from this?
Well,
And
and
that's
it's
what,
not just
yeah.
me, it's the client too, right? Like
Oh, of
you want
course,
to see
right,
ROI, right? I
right,
know, like I've been around long enough to be from the days where market research for the sake of research was done. We don't do it that way anymore.
right.
Like everyone is pushed more and more to show return on marketing
Mm,
investment, return on spend. And so it doesn't serve my clients if they don't end up using what I do. So they want to just sit on it, that's fine with me. But
yeah,
it's really it's unfortunate for them, and then it just colors moving forward the perception of what market research can bring to the table for an organization.
yeah,
So it's so critical to really just level set and reverse engineer. And by the way, that's not necessarily everyone's that's the method and mode perspective, and
sure.
that's the Swanson perspective on how to execute, successful research for brands. There are definitely perspectives where it's much more exploratory and less hypothesis driven, and those are valid as well. So it's really about finding when you're working with research partners, especially and don't necessarily have an in-house insights capability. It's really about what's the right culture fit for your brand.
How much that you just brought up in-house, and that was my next question is how much of this tends to be in-house? Is it diverse even within like a larger organization? Let's take a larger company. Is some of it in-house and is some of it they contracting out? What tends to be the case there?
Yeah. It's all stripes. But the bigger the organizations are and the more that they rely on research for product development, I think the more likely they are to have customer insights in-house. Most customer insights in-house teams are still working with partners to execute the amount of research that needs to get done, whether that's because they have one-off studies that are just too large of a capability given all the other responsibilities on one's plate, or because they have specific expertise where they they need to bring in more hands. Oftentimes, when working with in-house teams, oftentimes what someone like myself or organizations like mine will expect is that there are certain ways that survey questions get asked, that there's a much more a higher likelihood that you're able to tap into customers because they're already set up with infrastructure to do that. Oftentimes they have customer engagement panels. So there's a little bit more of a templatized approach to how to execute. And so someone like myself or a firm like Mark Method and Mode will kind of help, help advise and help carry through on a project.
Mm-hmm.
What often can happen as well is that there's just a breadth of work where it's too much for an insights team to handle. And over the years, they've increasingly become smaller, has been what I've seen around the board. So sometimes there's a large initiative where they just need someone to be able to manage an end-to-end experience and not have to lean on the internal team. So I've worked in all kinds of capacities with those teams. But yeah, generally the larger the organization and the larger the business, the more likely they are to have internal insights, and the more likely that there's a culture of expecting that research exists and that there are insights. Whether or not it's utilized is to its fullest potential, it's another question. But if there's insights people in-house, that at least that the senior management team and the executives know that they have the capabilities to tap their customers.
Sure, sure. Well, as we start to wind down, I guess just let's say we're working with a company that's in like the 30 to $45 million range, top line. I mean, if they were to come to you and say, "Hey, we're looking into market research options, alternatives," just as not necessarily trying to sign them as a client, but what would you tell them to look out for, or what are the top tips as they start to go through this process?
Yeah, I think, look, there's so many ways you can tackle research at an organization that level. There are tons of self-service tools. There are tons of small shops like myself. There's big firms that have a super productized approach to things. So I'd say really the first step is thinking through what types of research would work for you and kind of starting your approach there. I guess some tips I would say, I guess I have some avoiding is,
Yeah, definitely.
don't budget $10,000 and think you can do everything in one study. It's not going to happen. No one's going to be happy. I think something else I would try to avoid is signing on with a platform or a partner without having someone dedicated to resource, a dedicated resource who's going to manage that relationship and what it takes to leverage that platform,
Mm-hmm.
right? So there are a number of great tools. Something like Suzy comes to mind, and they've done a great job kind of shaking up the market research marketplace and getting their name out there as kind of a turnkey, effective solution that can be DIY, that can get you scale, that can get you quick quant insights. They have qual capabilities as well.
Mm-hmm.
You still need someone who's going to do that work though, right? It's not like you just sign on for the enterprise contract with a big partner and then it just research happens. So don't invest in that. Don't make that investment unless you have resourcing to staff against that platform and actually make it useful. I think, don't just throw up a Google form and think like, oh, we did a survey. I've seen so many brands and even some really great brands send out a survey in a Google form to their list and like it hasn't been spell checked and the logic doesn't work and the questions are not relevant to me and it's just like it probably doesn't have a horrible detriment on eroding brand favorability, but we can do better, right? Like you can do a little better. So there are great, really cost-effective solutions and ways to make sure it's, that you're buttoned up if you're going to go that route. And to that end about contextual relevance, talk to your CRM team or your database manager, however that's structured in your organization. See what you can actually pull in before you blast a list. If you're talking to people and you expect them to have a certain behavior or a certain profile, a certain amount of, a certain relationship with you already, make sure that your survey questions reflect that. And if you can target that email to make sure that's incorporated, Again, it just helps make things make more sense for you when you analyze it, and for your customers when they receive that.
Yeah, context is king for sure,
Yeah.
all the way through the pipeline. Well, this was awesome. Thank you so much for your time, and I think a lot of great insights and a lot of great learnings. And yeah, we'll be posting this online and via podcast, and just continue to tune into banknotes.co for more content and more announcements on future webinars. Thank you, Rachel.
Thanks, Ian.
Okay, bye-bye.